If you like, and if you're in the audience. Welcome to the March 12th meeting of the Historic Resources Board. Would you like to call roll?
Chair Kohler.
Here.
Vice Chair McKinnon. Here. Board Member Bernstein.
Here.
Board Member Powell.
Here.
Board Member Vandenberg.
Here.
Board Member DeSicio.
Here.
Board Member Wimmer. Thank you.
Oh, good. We were just talking about you. So good. So today's meeting is essentially, I don't think I even have a, talking about board procedures and the City of Council meeting with council coming up this next week or following week. Is it 20?
That's been changed, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, actually, first on the agenda is election of officers.
oh, I guess I, okay, first on the agenda is election of officers.
No, it's actually not.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have, oh, okay, I do have this. No, this is not, okay. Is there anyone from the public who'd like? I guess I do. Here. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's oral communications. Any members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda. 3 minutes per speaker. The Historic Resources Board reserves the right to limit oral communications to a period of 30 minutes. Do I have a card? I have a card from Mark Weiss, I think.
Hannah Cohen, 97. Hannah Duizen Cohen, a former resident of Palo Alto, has died. She was 97. Cohen, who died March 9th, was born in Amsterdam and came to the U.S. in 1939, eventually settling in Palo Alto and later in her retirement years in Santa Cruz. She was a member of Congregation Beth Am in Los Altos Hills for more than 50 years. Cohen helped prepare more than 300 children for their bar and bat mitzvahs and other forms of aliyah. She is survived by her sons Ron, Marianne Cohen, Rick, Marilyn Cohen, and Rusty, Tracy Cohen, 9 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Cohen was preceded in death by her husband Leo and her sons Randy and Rodney. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Nice little, yeah. I think I may have met her at one point. Thank you. Next is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Any?
None, no changes.
Are there any minutes for us to approve? Nope, okay. Board member items, election of officers continued from February 18th, 2015 meeting. Okay. I guess we take nominations. Is that how it works? Okay. Someone from the board has to.
I'd like to make a nomination that have Roger Kohler continue as president.
Is there a second, I think? You have to have
I think we had a rather short tenure for the past year, and it's been somewhat customary that we extend to give you full duty.
Well, so this would last for another year, is that right, or is it next?
Thanks. Elections are scheduled annually in October.
Okay.
Did not occur last October, so that's why we're asking for that procedure to occur.
So it's not a year, okay.
I'd support Roger as chairman. I'm not going to support him as president, though.
His Excellency will suffice.
There's been a nomination. Any other? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Yes.
Wow, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Job well done.
Now we have, we have a vice chairman.
Yeah, that's it.
So I'll nominate Michael to the vice chair position.
I second that.
I second.
Okay, it's been, Mike's been nominated and seconded. All those in favor for Mike to continue as the vice chairman? Say aye.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you. So the next discussion item is for council, discussion item is for the council HRB joint meeting, which is, date's been changed again, is that what I just heard you say? Okay.
Yes, the date has been changed to May 11th. I'm sorry. Get a little closer to the mic. The date has been changed to May 11th for the joint HRB City Council meeting.
Oh, gosh. That's a bit of a jump.
Subject to change, I assume?
Yeah.
Until further notice.
May 11th, okay.
So we still want to go through with the discussions to talk to the council? Okay, it sounds like staff has some suggestions, is that correct?
Yes, staff does have a presentation. It would be good, I think, to continue to prepare for this meeting. There will be a lot of information to cover with the council. So, so staff has prepared a presentation or the beginning of a presentation, and hopefully we can work with the board to populate the remaining slides and get some more information and data in there. Just to review, at the meeting with the mayor and the vice mayor and the chair and the vice chair, a request was made that staff provide approximately 10-minute introduction at the beginning of the joint meeting. And so this presentation reflects that 10 minutes or that presentation that I will actually be giving at the joint meeting. So, so what I'd like to do is proceed with presenting the information more or less as I would present it at that joint meeting for your benefit. And then after we've gone through that, we can perhaps have a discussion as to what additional information should be in the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and proceed. So just a note, again, the date has been changed to May 11th, so it has not been reflected yet in the presentation. Good evening, council members and HRB members. Matthew Weintraub, Historic Preservation Planner. I'm here to provide an introduction to the Historic Resources Board. So quickly, this is an overview of how the presentation will proceed. And again, just a note to you as the HRB members, this is a suggestion as to which members might want to talk on particular items. So again, please let me know if this looks good or if you want to make any changes. So we'll begin with an introduction to the HRB by city staff. That'll take about 10 minutes. Then we'll have some project examples and success stories presented by Roger and Beth. Then we'll review some challenges to the HRB's operations. That'll be presented by Martin and Mike. And then the proposed work program that the HRB would like to propose to the council, presented by Margaret and Patricia. Then we'll have time for council member questions and comments and public comments as well. So just to briefly go through the HRB role and responsibility, as defined in the administrative code, the HRB's role is basically to render design advice and guidance to owners of historic properties, to make design recommendations to the ARB as well as to other city bodies and city staff who are making decisions about properties, to recommend historic property designations to the city council through the historic inventory, and other functions as delegated by the council. So these are sort of the broader duties and responsibilities of the board. Now, if we take a closer look at the municipal code, it more clearly defines what the role of the HRB is or what the purview for review is. So first of all, anything to be reviewed by the HRB has to be subject to a building permit. So if a building permit is not required, the code does not require review by the HRB. It refers to exterior alterations only, except in extreme situations where you might have an interior, but generally it says that you're really looking at the exterior of properties. And you're looking at the properties that are listed in the city's historic and architectural inventory. So the HRB's purview is the properties in the inventory, which include all the properties in the Professorville district, the properties that are in the Ramona Street district, and the properties that are identified as category 1 through 4 in the inventory, which are located citywide. So some additional, so here's just a map that shows you where these inventory properties are located in the city. So we can see that Professorville is located pretty much in the center of the map there, contains almost 200 properties. Ramona Street is a much smaller historic district in downtown, contains a total of 8 properties. And then there are a total of 411 category 1 through 4 buildings located citywide, including within the historic districts. So these are the properties that are subject to the HRB review. Properties not on the inventory are not subject to the HRB review. There are some nuances. Yes, Michael?
Just had a question here. How about the Eichler historic districts?
We'll be getting to that. Thank you.
Okay.
So there are some nuances to the code and what projects actually come before the HRB for review. So I mentioned that inventory properties are subject to the HRB review. Well, the code actually makes an exception for category 3 and 4 properties that are located outside of downtown and outside of the historic districts. Those are not subject to HRB review. Now, if they are CEQA resources, and if CEQA review occurs, they would be reviewed pursuant to CEQA, potential impacts to a historical resource. But again, that doesn't directly involve the HRB. Also not subject to the HRB's review are the National Register and California Register properties that are not also listed in the city's inventory. And those are the 2 Eichler tracts that are identified in the National Register, Green Gables and Green Meadow. So while these would be considered historical resources pursuant to CEQA and processed accordingly, they are not subject to any HRB review under the code. And additionally, not subject to HRB review, many applications involving 1-family and 2-family homes are not subject to any discretionary review or CEQA review. And that can include demolitions, additions, and facade alterations. So the code itself excludes or doesn't include a lot of scopes of work that would, as normally requiring HRB review. And if discretionary review is not required under the code, then compliance with HRB recommendations is voluntary for owners. So if we have a situation, for instance, Professorville, where all permits come to the HRB, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a discretionary permit. If it's not a discretionary permit, then the owner's compliance is voluntary. So I would see those as some challenges to the HRB's role in the community in terms of its purview, in terms of being able to review properties. The HRB standards, or review standards, are provided for in the Historic Preservation Ordinance. They provide actually very general standards of review that basically say you should not project should not have an adverse impact on architectural characteristics, or within districts, an impact to the buildings or the surroundings. So those are certainly good principles, but they're not, there's not any concrete guidance there necessarily. So in 1987, the City Council adopted the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation for the HRB to use, and those are standards that are used across the nation by a lot of cities and towns. And just to address a couple more items that relate to the HRB's business, historic character is addressed in the comprehensive plan. In the, pardon me, in the land use and community design element, there are principles and programs to preserve historic character. Many communities do have a separate historic preservation element in their code. The City of Palo Alto does not have that. It does include the principles in another element. So here we can see that there are some pretty clear mandates to preserve historic character in citywide as well as in certain areas like downtown. And lastly,
Matt,
Yes.
excuse me for interrupting. What's what are the, in the last
Oh.
slide, L12, L51?
Those are the actual program numbers. If you look at the comprehensive plan, all the goals, objectives, policies, et cetera, have program numbers, and those are the designations for those particular ones. Just briefly, there are preservation incentives. Actually, Palo Alto offers a very robust package of preservation incentives, including floor area bonuses, parking exceptions, transfer of development rights, and lot size exceptions for residential subdivisions, all of which involve historic properties. The City Council is the body that authorizes the development incentives. The HRB doesn't have a direct role in authorizing the incentives, but the HRB does have a role in recommending properties to the inventory that would be eligible for incentives. So that concludes staff's presentation. At this time, we'll now open it up to HRB members to present project examples and success stories. What I'd like to do now is just briefly walk you through how to, what the rest of the presentation would look like, just so you can see. So we'd have project examples, a number of slides, probably 5 or 10 minutes, I would think, would be a good period of time to spend on the project examples. Some challenges, and these are some challenges that I've identified as possibly challenges that the HRB may want to include. So these are my recommendations for discussion. So I think some of the challenges that the HRB faces is the municipal code itself. Many historic properties and projects are accepted from HRB and planner review, as we just covered. The inventory itself was at last updated in 1995. The State Office of Historic Preservation recommends that doing updates at least every 5 years. So there's a question as to whether our inventory is necessarily complete or accurate as properties have changed over time. And we lack a lot of good design tools to assist property owners and the HRB and staff in proceeding through the process quickly. So for instance, district design guidelines would be something that would be very useful, as we all know. The next slide is a proposed work program. Again, this is just staff's recommendations for discussion as to items that might be put into the work program. Number one is Professorville Design Guidelines, which is actually a work item that's been ongoing for some time. Staff has identified the need to augment those guidelines with some concrete examples and some perhaps some additional prescriptive measures that really outline clearly what is expected. We've identified that may be a project that could receive a CLG grant in the coming fiscal year. So staff is currently preparing an application for a grant to hire a consultant to assist and provide a real professional level of, not that what's occurred hasn't been professional, but I think what's been lacking is a paid professional. In other words, someone who's being paid to produce a work product that will meet the community's needs. So we're looking at doing that. Another potential work program item would be to develop a modern era context statement. The existing inventory and surveys that have previously occurred in the city have covered evaluations up to approximately World War II. So we have the period between World War II and approximately 1970 or so, which is more or less 50 years ago, that we don't have a really good inventory and context for historical resources in the city. So staff has identified that as a way to fill out the city's survey program. And again, that would be a project that could be subject to a CLG grant in the coming year. So staff is preparing an application to submit for a consultant to prepare a professional level context statement for that period of time, which would allow the city to move forward with identifying potential resources that are within that period of time, mid-century modern era resources, essentially. Two other work items that we might look at sort of long-term and discuss what the prospects are would be updating the city inventory. As we noted, the inventory was updated some time ago. There may have been changes to the physical condition of some properties. Would be good to look at that again. And lastly, the historic preservation ordinance itself, or the code, in terms of does it truly allow for historic preservation review to occur as it should occur in terms of are all the properties being reviewed? Is the HRB getting to provide input on properties that have a preservation component, or are there areas that could be improved? So thank you, and that does conclude staff's presentation.
I would just like to add that our council liaison to the Historic Resources Board is here, and I mentioned, as he came in after the presentation began, I mentioned that this is what we were doing, was kind of an initiation of our presentation and discussion, and he did mention, Mr. Dubois did mention that he is interested in having a role in this joint meeting. So I think that's great. Yeah.
Well, why doesn't he come sit up
If
here?
you want to come sit, we have lots of chairs here if you're interested, or, other fashion to participate in, yeah.
Okay, thank you. How long did that take for you to present that to us? That was 10,
Yeah, I wasn't actually timing myself, but yeah, I did include some additional information, sort of comments and things like that. I do think that my presentation will take about 10 minutes to cover those first 10 or 11 slides.
yeah, just from the past experience, we've tried some of that, and it sort of, the council, as I said, kind of takes over, so I don't know if we can be a little, I'm just explaining some of the past meetings we have with the council. We have had our schedule of events, we've had stuff ready to go on display, and before we know it, the council just starts talking between themselves, and we don't really end up doing much presentation. So I just kind of, the ones who have been through that in the past, I don't know how, I've been to 2 or 3 of them, because we don't have them every year. They're kind of random as well.
I mean, we've done a couple of other boards and commissions so far this year. It seems that we get about an hour, and so far we've let the boards present before we interrupt and talk. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure glad to have you here this morning. That's good, because this is I think it's a pretty important discussion. And I think my thought first, I'll let the other board members speak, is I think your outline is quite good, and just worried that it gets too long, we might lose interest in some of it. But the overall outline, to me, looks pretty good. Other board members, David, your light's on. So.
I was just thinking that with Matt starting the presentation off with slides and in this format, I think it'll be easier to get our information to the city council. And in the past meetings, we haven't had this format, and I think that's one of the reasons why the discussion sort of drifted off into council member concerns, which are legitimate and we want to hear about. But so I'm not as concerned about that this year. Although I can't remember the last time we actually met with the council. I think it was when I was chairperson, which was what, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Can it be that long?
Yep.
Anyway.
Patricia, your light's on. Did you want to say something? Yes, go ahead.
Just to jump right in, I think one of the most successful things that we've done has been the providing of photographs of some of the success stories. And I think Roger Kohler deserves a lot of credit for pulling those together at times. In terms of, I went back and did some looking through the last several years of projects we've had, and some of them are just now coming to completion. And I would like to put the old main library, now called Rinconada, at the top of the list as far as a success story that very much lends itself to talking about the Secretary of Interior standards. because it's a wonderful addition that is very respectful of the old building. They got rid of the ugly skylights on the old building. It's amazing what they've done. And this copy of the weekly is a very good summary of that sort of thing. So that's my first nomination. The second one is for the Pacific Art League, which managed to tuck a new addition in, and it has worked out very nicely, and they cleaned up the sort of jumble of buildings back in there. So it's, again, I think a successful project. Another one is the Varsity Theater, and that is, thank goodness they didn't put a canopy over the courtyard, as was suggested. Then I think there have been several houses that we've had that were very, very successful, and several with problems. And the problems were 564 University Avenue, which was moving a building, and it has taken years to get straightened out. 433 Melville, again, moving a building, and they didn't save much historic fabric. The moving of the building at Edgewood Plaza, which again was one that demolition occurred during the process. So I think there's some real problems in that area. The ones that the most people turned out for the HRB were 505 Embarcadero. And by the way, that suddenly has a construction fence around it this morning. But that was the one with privacy from neighbors that were all around, and a balcony, particularly on the back. And the other one was possible nomination of the Little League ballpark. And that was, again, privacy and neighbors' concerns. And another one that was a great potential problem was 27 University Avenue, which was the proposal to move the Veterans Building, which is our only Veterans Memorial in town. So I'll leave it to the rest of the board to see what suggestions you have.
Well, I think you started off with a pretty good list there. It's all within the last, I think almost all the board members were around for all those projects, except maybe Margaret for not, but. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to do it. Now, I have those boards I had at our meeting, the gray boards. I was going to have Beth too. I thought I might, since I've got what was there, I thought I'd try to get, I may have some pictures showing what they look like now, as just put them right on next to the boards I already have. And maybe Beth can, now we have some time, we can do that. I think that's one way to really show how important our board is and the success stories and some of the failures, but a before and after photo is a pretty clear statement of what would, and then like the hospital where David was born, the finial on top was Beth's suggestion. Hoover. So David can tell us what it was like to be born there, and we can move on. Okay. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, on one of your previous slides, it looks like that you had assigned us, paired us up and assigned us with present part of the meeting, and I just wanted to go back to that and hear a little bit more about what you had in mind in terms of that, and if that's something if that's part of the content that we need to come up with, or is that something that you just want us to present at the meeting?
So thank you. So these aren't really assignments. They're really just recommendations or suggestions based on some of the comments that different HRB members have made at times in terms of areas that they might be interested in speaking on. So let me just get back to that slide briefly. And I think what we would ask the HRB members to do is coordinate with staff so that we can get that information into our PowerPoint and then have it as a sort of a unified presentation for the council. So, so Beth and Roger, perhaps if you have photographs or other information that you want to provide to staff, we can scan that and get that into our PowerPoint. And we can also have the boards and things set up around the room, but it would be good to have them actually as part of the PowerPoint. So this is the slide where we've made some suggestions as to who might want to speak on certain items.
You didn't have to bring copies of this little presentation for us.
I did not, but I can email it, or I can print some copies right after the meeting and provide them.
Okay.
But yeah, I apologize, I did not bring the hard copies.
Chair Kovler?
How come I didn't get an assignment?
We thought you weren't going to be here, so so we definitely need to include
But you're
you.
going to be here now, I guess.
Well, we hope.
But he wasn't going to be here for some previous dates. You probably don't know whether you're here or not on.
No, I do know it. I'll be here on the 11th.
Okay. You
I
did.
think you can help Margaret and I with the Rose Work program. There's a lot
And
of stuff on that.
I would say there's no requirement that every HRB member has to speak too. So again, it's just a suggestion to get everyone involved.
Go ahead, Beth, I guess.
The other thing is that in terms of actually some of this issue of what to talk about, the calls that I get from the public are almost all from someone in a neighborhood who suddenly realizes a huge house is going to go in. This is particularly true down in the Eichler neighborhoods. And it's panic. It's not only that it's a big house that fills the lot, it's that it's two-story. It begins to seriously erode that neighborhood. The other calls are from people in the older part of town who sort of assume that certain houses are protected, and suddenly they realize they're not. And it comes as a great shock. Then there are the people who began to wonder about things like the Boyette house, which was demolished right across from Steve Jobs' house, and the lot is sitting there vacant. We lost I've forgotten whether it's category 3 or 4, and now nothing's happening. So I think that there's a great need to communicate to our neighborhoods what the options are for them in advance of having these problems, because literally our hands are tied, the staff's hands are tied in being able to respond to what are becoming very anguished kinds of phone calls.
How come you get all the phone calls? How come you get all the phone calls? I don't ever get any calls. Go ahead.
So just thinking about the proposal to council, and I thought it was a really good outline. You might not have enough time, but I actually think, in terms of ordinance changes, if you came with some specific ideas, that would help direct the conversation. And also around the inventory update process, I think you said it was about 5 years. It just struck me that, what if you had an annual rolling process? Would that be less work for each update and do it more often? And again, those kinds of specifics I think would help direct the conversation. Otherwise, when you get to council, people are just going to throw out a whole bunch of ideas. So if you can direct it a little bit, it might be a better approach.
experience we've had is that it's sort of suddenly taken over by city council. And I'm a little worried that this presentation is, it's real very good, that about halfway through it, they're going to start asking questions. And
Well, yeah, if it was more directed, that they would have something specific to react to.
so maybe what we should try to do, we have a little more time now, is to maybe come up with maybe 1 or 2 really important items that our board thinks we ought to present over it. I don't know why this is so loud, to the council, instead of trying to do a huge overview. I'm not, that's just me talking, but I think if we could, I mean, Beth's probably true, is that a lot of people make assumptions about what can and can't be done in their neighborhood. I don't know how you inform them better, but I think the council probably gets as many calls, probably gets more calls than we do in terms of what's going on in the neighborhood, is what I would think.
If I could just address that point in terms of community contact and questions that the public may have. The department is developing some new and better informational tools to make available to the public that will more clearly identify what the options are, what the review paths are, what the thresholds for review are, and we think that will go a long way to answering some of these questions. Also would ask HRB members to certainly continue to provide information to members of the public when asked, but also refer them to city staff. We may have information that you may not be aware of because you're looking at one segment of a project. We may have a much larger overview or some other information that may assist members of the public as well. So please don't be shy to refer them to city staff if need be, and perhaps take a little of that burden off of your shoulders as well. And just to review, or just to reiterate that the first 10 minutes or so of this presentation, I will work on streamlining it and moving through a little more quickly. You know, I wanted to walk the HRB members through perhaps a little bit more slowly, but I will make sure to speed through that so that we do get to the real discussion points.
David.
And the single-story overlay, of course, is one tool that neighborhoods can use, but many of them don't know about it. So that one needs some
It's not quite as easy as you sound. Martin, go ahead. You've been waiting.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As far as this meeting on May 11th, 1 hour, hour and a half, has that been established yet? How much time will I have?
We have not received a definite on that. Again, the meeting date is moving, but I know in our meeting that we had briefly with our mayor about timing, she seemed to be in support of a longer than 1 hour meeting. And I think there are some things here that Member Bunnenberg was mentioning that have been kind of percolating, the single-story overlays. We have a couple of neighborhoods that are engaged with staff to launch that. We've had several individual review projects, 2-story homes in track neighborhoods. The thing about South Palo Alto is a lot of tracks, and so change is quite noticeable. So we are, gathering and talking, and we will be preparing something about that. I know it's an interest of councils as well.
Yeah, and then continuing on Beth's comments about neighbor notification. My experience in San Francisco is if someone's going to make any change to a property, neighbors get a little note in the mail. I think that's the process in San Francisco, and whether it's historic even or if it's not historic. So that's been a good neighborhood method that seems to be working in San Francisco.
You mean any kind of anything to the property?
Seems like there's any change, I think, in San Francisco neighborhoods. I have property up there, and it seems like if a neighbor is going to do anything, it's not a historic issue, just if they're making a change, we get a little notice.
Sorry, it's outside the building envelope. If
Yeah,
you're
exterior
within the original
alterations.
building and you're not in an historic district, then then you get to do what you want to do. If you're going to change, at least that was the way it was 5 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe it's changed. But
And
that's
then,
the same thing here.
Then responding to Councilmember Du Bois, is that the correct pronoun, Du Bois? Du Bois, comment about having specific things such as suggestions for ordinance changes or additions, so I'd be in support of that idea. I'd be happy to be participating in that list too.
May I actually address that particular point? You know, I think the suggestion for some specific suggestions to the code is excellent, and I've identified a couple that I would like to toss out for the HRB to consider as possible recommendations. One is to include National Register and California Register properties automatically in the city's inventory, so that they are subject to the same provisions as locally designated properties. So that would be one change. The second change would be to include category 3 and 4 properties in the HRB's review citywide, so that there's not an exclusion for 3 and 4 properties outside of those certain zones. And the third would be to require any building permit involving an inventory property to be subject to an HRB discretionary review, so that the code clearly states that if it's a property on the inventory and there's a building permit proposed, that is a discretionary project that is subject to HRB or staff level review, because the ordinance does allow for staff level review of minor scopes of work. So not every project would have to come to the HRB, but every project would be subject to some level, every project involving an inventory property would be subject to some level of preservation review. Those are three possible revision items that I would put out there as for discussion.
Could you also provide that information in writing after the meeting? And to piggyback on that, if we're relying on the current inventory, which is, again, only reviewed, it's been 15, 20 years, something? 95?
2000 actually is when the survey was completed, the survey update. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are, by the way, a number of potential California register properties.
Right.
That would be a huge list of properties to begin to look at.
Actually.
But that is that gray area that people are so concerned about.
I'm not, you're holding that up. I'm not sure if all the current board members have a copy of that. I have one because we got one quite a few years ago.
I don't think so, but, you know.
Do you have, I mean, that's, because I get calls occasionally with people, and I have just that same book available.
So may I address that? And Board Member Bunenberg, I can't read the title. What is the title of that document?
The title of the document was Study Priority 1 and Study Priority 2. So it is a huge list.
Okay, so thank you very much.
And they had not been worked up, not all the
Right.
priority 1s and 2s even had been.
So I have done some research into that particular document and the process that produced that document. That document, the list of study priority 1 and 2 properties, was produced during the survey process as part of the methodology to identify properties that were ultimately eligible as resources. The final survey report clearly states that when the final evaluations were done, that list was retired, meaning the list went away, meaning that the properties in that list were actually thoroughly reviewed during the process, and decisions were made on those properties. So, and this is something that, you know, for whatever reason, I think that document took on a life of its own through departmental review procedures. But if we go back and look at the documentation and what was actually adopted by the council, it clearly excludes that particular document as potential resources. In other words, what it does is it does adopt the final evaluations, which are not included in that particular document. So, so I think there are a large number of properties that you call the gray area I'm not sure that they actually are a gray area, at least not as far as the city views those properties today. Now, that might be something to look at in a survey update, is whether or not the properties evaluated 15 years ago, our perspective has changed, and some of those properties might be eligible. But right now, I would say that that document isn't a gray area per se. It's you know, we know what that document is.
Quick question, if I could, sorry. On the inventory, did I hear you say that nothing after World War II, so anything that has to do with the birth of Silicon Valley is not really considered historical right now?
Thank you. Not in the city's inventory. So the city, in the city's inventory, doesn't have any properties that are post-World War II, essentially. So now there are National Register properties that have been listed that reflect post-World War II history, but that has been done typically through property owner initiation and things like that. And again, those aren't necessarily recognized by the city's inventory. So I would submit that that the inventory and the surveys that we have today are pretty good in terms of pre-World War II and up to World War II. I think it's the post-World War II or the modern era that we need to really look at as a gap in our information, and that's why staff is proposing the modern era context statement as well, as a way to, you know, we could look at that as an update to the survey in a way, or an inventory.
See, Martin, go ahead. I guess
Yes,
go ahead, David.
Thank you. I think for tagging on to Beth's comment about that, the study standards 1 and 2, what was it called again? Study standards? The list, priority, yeah. That is retired, and I think it's important to then just, you know, not continue the idea of those priority sessions. From a public relations point of view, I think from citizens' point of view, have it real clear either this is on the list of historic or not. And then, as Matt was mentioning, you know, if an ordinance changed to include all the California registered, national registers, stuff like that, that way just one list only would be really clear. Also, part of the update's important. It's Councilmember Du Bois. The University Art Building is Category 3. So that's an example of maybe a miscategorization. So another important reason to update the inventory. So.
Let's see, let's go back and then to David.
So after Matt's first 3 suggestions, like ordinance actions, I have 4 more that we've talked about but haven't actually resolved as a board. One is, we've had very good success with study sessions. And while we make it voluntary, I think if we're going to do some ordinance adjustments, we probably ought to make that required, because I think that saves the people who own the historic properties money, because they don't get so far down the line with architectural development before they come before us. And I'm thinking of the last one we had, which I think was on Webster Street, that project that was brought before us, where the second-story addition so overwhelmed the original house. If we had seen that at full plan development, that would have been a horrible mistake. So that's one thing. We have also talked about inventory updates, whether we want to have or need to have 4 categories, since categories 3 and 4 seem to be almost identical. I think we need to, if we're going to do this ordinance update, and hopefully we can get the council to do this, we ought to simplify that. I mean, I don't see the difference between, I understand the language between 1 and 2, but I don't see that there's enough difference. As I think Martin suggested in a prior meeting, we ought to have 2 categories. Another one that we have not talked about is how to create greater incentives. The incentives, Matt, you have in your presentation only really apply to the downtown business district without transfer development rights. And I don't know how you do this with on the residential level, but unless we can give the residential owners of small cottages built in the 20s and 30s, which are being torn down at an astounding rate, we're going to lose all of that. We're going to have a city of two-story houses that, just changes our community radically. So I think that's a discussion the board ought to have, and we ought to bring something to the council and let the council then try to work that out. The last one was, I think everything needs to be accessible on the website. I don't know whether the Danes and Moore survey is on there, but I think everyone, right, I think everybody who wants to develop a property ought to be able to go to the city website and see if it's an historic property, just like we can tell whether or not we're in a flood zone and what the elevation is. So those are 4 more things I think we ought to consider.
Beth?
Actually, David just reviewed or made recommendations on that part of what I was going to suggest too, that the inventory needs a lot of work, it sounds like to me, and whether you eliminate 4 categories, have 2, have 3, and maybe some ought to be downgraded from what the Dames and Moore, I have about the thickest version, I think, that was given to me by the city back in probably 1980. Does that sound right? 1981? And I kind of was looking at it, and a lot of the description and whatever is very incomplete in a lot of the properties that are listed. Another thing that is affected by how the Category 1 and Category 2, and I'm not sure how many are actually National Register Category 1 houses in Palo Alto, but another incentive for the cottages, the individual residences, would be the use of the Mills Act in this city, which is very unused, shall we say, to start with, and only, I think, includes those houses that are in Category 1. And I really believe if you've got a house on the California Register, the state register, you should probably be able to participate in that, and the city could possibly participate also in involvement in the Mills Act. That would be a really big incentive. People wait in line down in San Diego and Coronado to have their properties put on the list and have a waiting list to be included in the Mills Act, because it is a savings for the resident. And right now it seems to me that most of the savings are going to the major players in this town that get the development rights and, are the ones that primarily benefit.
Can I speak to that? Yes. So, Councilman DeVos, we have had a brief discussion about Mills Act, and the history in Palo Alto, of course, is that there was one Mills Act, one, I think, designation on the Squire, 2 on the Squire House, and it was considered, I think, historically a huge mistake, because they've granted this huge property tax relief forever. And then the council basically said, we're not doing this ever again. And that was done in 1972, I think. So San Francisco has a very different way to apply the Mills Act. San Francisco is a very challenged school district, obviously, but they, first of all, require a fairly hefty upfront permitting or processing fee in the $5,000 to $7,000 range. And you then are granted a portion of your property tax relief. And Matt, you know more about this than I do. And it's for a limited duration. It's not forever. So I think it's something like 10 years, Matt, is that correct? Just in general?
Typically, Mills Act contracts are 10 years.
Right. Okay. So a property owner who is granted this incentive gets some property tax relief. They get for a limited period of time, and then it's re-upped. There's a situation, I'll use, again, very close to me, the house next door to me that was purchased in 1980 for $80,000, just sold for $1.7 million. It's a 900 square foot cottage, 1946. It would actually qualify as a unique development for the period. Property taxes were $1,200 before it sold. Now they're $20,000. Now, I went to school from kindergarten through high school here. So did my grandmother, my parents, and my children. I know all about the school district issues. and they seem never to have enough money. And the last thing I would want to do is to deprive them of funds to continue, so that they can continue to keep the schools very strong. I would expect that the school district will push back on any Mills Act program, but we need to find a way to balance the needs for good schools with the need to preserve our community. I think this is the way to do it, and I think we should propose this to the council as part of our ordinance update.
May I speak to a couple of the items that were just brought up? In terms of the Mills Act, so the Mills Act is a state-authorized program, and cities really have a lot of flexibility in how they want to administer it, or if they want to administer it, and if they choose to, how they want to. They can set caps in terms of the number of applications that they'll receive each year. There can be a cap on the total amount of tax relief provided by the city. There can be a number of different ways to control the amount of relief that's provided, while still allowing property owners to avail themselves of that. So I think it's up to each community to figure out what's the right balance for that community, and to put that program out there for people to use. Without a doubt, it is the most effective tool for residential property owners, particularly small residential residences, to preserve their properties in terms of incentives. In terms of the inventory, I do want to go back and just state that our inventory, our existing inventory, is really solid. It has excellent bones. There was really good research done behind it. It is a really good survey, and I've seen a lot of surveys in different communities in California. So I can say that you should be comfortable that you have a really solid survey. It's more a matter of updating it and seeing if there are areas that weren't covered in the original efforts. But I think just to reiterate that I think it is a really solid survey. In terms of the categories, how it defines 1s, 2s, and 3s, and 4s, in terms of effectiveness, there is no difference between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 can be grouped together as landmarks, 3s and 4s can be grouped together as contributors, and that's how the code really treats them. So I think that's a good point. We do need to update our website, no doubt about that. We're working on that. And study sessions are definitely a good idea. I think we just have to ask ourselves, does it need to be in the ordinance, or is it something that we can do through policies or resolutions and things like that? And we can certainly discuss that further.
Great.
And this is the size of our historic inventory, our current historic.
Martin?
Yeah, why don't
Councilmember Du Bois, there's public conversations about, here's just one example in the newspaper about style wars, modern buildings in a downtown area versus traditionally buildings next door. Part of the Secretary of Interior standards, have you heard of that, Doc? Are you familiar with that? Yeah. And it talks about some of the standards for conformance is compatibility and differentiation. And so part of the public conversation is if you have, say, for example, a historic district like Ramona Street, for example, and then outside of the district, if a building is going to be proposed to be very modern, the debate of, well, shouldn't the new building kind of blend in with the historic feeling so there's not so much contrast between new and old. So that's part of the debate of compatibility, and even the definition of compatibility, and then differentiation, and then how different can something be so it meets the standards, but yet it's still compatible. So it's a big debate. Those projects, if a modern building gets appealed, then the council hears about it and has to make some decisions about, almost like some design decisions. So if there's any way that you see the HRB can assist the council in helping, answer the question of, well, is it okay to be so different? The debate is, if new buildings are kind of blended in to look kind of historic looking, Well, I think that dilutes the true historic quality, so it's the issue of false historicism in a way. So if you see any way the HRB can assist the council, so when those questions come up, I think that'd be good. HRB is a good source to help with that conversation. So.
I got a couple more additional items to throw into your pile. One of my favorites is we don't capture any of the industrial sites here that would be of importance and should be considered, such as a Fairchild facility. That's totally lacking in any consideration we've had for historic sites. The other is something that's never been talked about here, but we do have the existence of bungalow courts in Palo Alto. I know at least 3 of them I've seen that are not given due diligence as far as historic properties. They're kind of like little mini historic districts in themselves. So I think that should be another consideration.
I guess I could briefly mention that I was on the way out toward 101 the other day, and I went by the Hewlett-Packard building that's right there before San Antonio as you come up Charleston, and there was 2 or 3 people there, as well as a fellow with a really nice tripod and camera was taking pictures of. As you go, as Charleston makes the turn going toward Orchard Supply, there's this little 1-story building, and it's got a big, monument plaque. It's where Hewlett and Packard first met and started their little business. That was their.
No, that's Shockwave's place.
Oh, Shockley, that's right. The transistor. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
So,
That's right, the Hewlett-Packard garage is just up the street
interestingly
here,
enough,
so-
the Hewlett-Packard building up at 1501 Page Mill, which I think is a fabulous architectural specimen, which they've, of course, added onto, it ought to be part of the resource inventory, I would think. Not only is it a marvel in its work layout, but because of it being a Hewlett-Packard building, it would have automatic historic significance, and it was the first expansion of the industrial park, really. I mean, they had the first building there. I have a photograph, an aerial photograph of Palo Alto taken from about Willow and Middlefield that projects southwest, and you can see Page Mill Road, and there's nothing on it. There's nothing out there. It was just fields. So, and then it was built shortly after, so.
Yeah, my dad worked for a company that was on the, behind the Stanford Library, they were meteorologists, and they moved into a building out there in the Stanford Industrial Park, and he was a photographer, so we have this giant 16mm movie of this building being built, and there were no other buildings around it. It's kind of neat. It's just this field, and here's this building being built, and now you can't find it because of all the trees and the buildings. It was just amazing turning. So, okay, one more. Margaret, are you light on it?
Yeah, I was just thinking about all of this new information that we're sort of throwing out right now, and does it seem like we need to schedule a study session before the joint meeting? Because it's just hard to manage all this information. It just makes me feel like we're just throwing all this stuff out, but what do we do? What do we do with it? How do we manage that, and how do we formulate that before this meeting?
We will have, the HRB has at least 3 regularly scheduled meetings to occur before May 11th. So the idea is that we would continue to work on this at our upcoming meetings, around the applications that come in, assuming we have some applications.
So maybe, I was just thinking, maybe it would be a good idea for us to divvy up the work. It seems like everyone kind of has things that they're naturally interested in. So maybe if we can assign ourselves some of these sort of homework assignments, then to come to the next meeting and say, hey, this is, like, I like that Michael's interested in all the industrial buildings. That's something that I wouldn't have thought of. So maybe we can sort of divide and conquer. I don't know.
You have to kind of remember that this is a hour to an hour and a half meeting and not an all-day seminar. And our experience in the past has been, the meeting gets taken away from all our goals. But to have a layout is important. It's going to be less than an hour and 15 minutes, and that's it.
Yeah, I think we have to have everything thought out and resolved, and basically it's a presentation, and then there'll be more discussion later. City council members will have their own issues that they want us to look at. So we can't really introduce anything that hasn't been thought out. As I'm looking at this list, Matt's list and ones that we've all talked about, including, national and state properties as part of our consideration, reviewing all inventoried properties, requiring study sessions. Those are probably not something we would even have much conversation about. We've already talked about them, and I think the board would probably agree that those are things that should be included in the inventory. So we really want to work on things like an incentive program, a Mills Act program, or something to that effect. So I think you could present to the board and say maybe the next meeting or the following one, the things that we've already talked about that we have some consensus over, and condense that into something that we can just say, yep, we like that, or no, we don't. And then let's work on actually creating the basis for, say, the Mills Act program, or how we're going to update these things. So that by the time we get to council, it's all done. As Margaret's suggesting, I don't think we're going to have any time or there's any point in making suggestions that we haven't already worked through.
So
I
just-
agree. I think the whole
oh,
board
sorry.
should have a consensus on each item instead of like two people, it's not like an assignment, as you said, but we should stand united as a board on some, and pick and choose our winners, I would say. And the other thing is that I constantly hear, and it really isn't specifically the case, but I would have to go through my paperwork. When you talk, the Mills Act now is kind of coming into the spotlight, hopefully, and it isn't all about the school district. It's a very complicated formula of how they come up with it, and how the taxes, and as Matt said, there's several ways to have the program and have it work successfully. And it does even follow the property, not the owner. And one of the problems in Palo Alto was with two houses, they did not oversee that they were complying. And so it's kind of a thing of the past. And it's pretty easy for a city to send their form out to the property owners that have the Mills Act and say, what have you done this year to comply with the Mills Act with your tax savings? But I think to know really how it affects the city budget, or the amount of property taxes that are collected in this city are astronomical.
So I just wanted to add, it looks like between now and the joint meeting, there's possibly 3 opportunities for us to meet again, just on our normal schedule, roughly. So maybe whether or not we have a project to review, we should keep those meetings, and maybe before the meeting, we say, okay, this meeting, we're going to talk about the Mills Act and the categories, and then we can formulate our own thoughts before the meeting, because I have thoughts about the categories that I would recommend, but maybe if we organize it in a way that we have maybe 2 specific items that we want to talk about, maybe 3, because it takes a while for all of us to chime in and talk about and organize it in a way. For me, I like to know ahead of time and be able to collect my thoughts instead of throwing all these ideas out. It gets a little bit unmanageable. So I'm just trying to think in my own mind how to make it make sense. And then we feel like we're moving towards the joint meeting in a logical way. That's all. So I was just thinking maybe we should keep our meetings as scheduled, but focus on this.
Go ahead, Beth.
Just quickly, and we're lucky that we have the Professorville guidelines fairly well in shape, and so that can be a sample of kind of thing that's helpful to a neighborhood.
Okay. Oh, Martin.
I think another challenge for any issue of historic preservation is keeping the public educated about the process of historic review. The standards, they're not prescriptive, they're subjective. And therefore, when we make our comments, yeah, we try to use scholarship, but there's still some subjectivity. There's not a prescription of, well, here's how, this is how you meet compatibility, this is how you meet differentiation. There's a lot of subjectivity. And for any change in the ordinance, the council needs public support. So again, if the council could suggest, or staff suggest, how ways or the HRB can contribute to the public's understanding that all this is subjective, not prescriptive. An ordinance is easier if everything's prescriptive. Building code is very prescriptive. Design is subjective. So it's just another challenge of how to get the public to support the council to make ordinance changes that include more properties on the register. So,
I would like to add that, of course, I don't think we want prescriptive guidelines. Franco tried that in Spain, and look what they got. I mean, they got horrendously ugly architecture. We don't really want one kind. We want subjective discussions about architecture and compatibility and scaling, not something that's put in an ordinance. That would be horrible.
Take into account the general public, the public, and you guys done yet?
I also like board members Wimmer's comment about, just keep our meetings if we can, and this can make these part of our agenda items.
I think one thing that's also changing, is pretty obvious, is the makeup of the public here in Palo Alto is changing. And that will have, and it is having an impact on a lot of the way Palo Alto works in general, I think. I mean, in my business, I'm seeing it. It's quite a different set of clients I have now than I had 20, 30 years ago. So it's, and the whole theory and view of housing in my end of the world has changed. It's quite different than the first started this business when everyone was thrilled to add a bedroom. Wow, that was a big deal. Oh, when you got a bathroom with it, wow, that was even a good thing. Man, a kitchen, wow. But now we have basements, so it's a changing world, that's for sure. Is there anything else on our agenda today? Is there any?
If I may just summarize what I believe the couple items that the council, couple items that the board would probably like to discuss at the next meeting appear to be the Mills Act and the category system. Those seem to be two items that are still kind of out there in terms of wanting some further discussion, and maybe board members want to think about it and come back to next meeting with some further ideas. In terms of how we'll arrange the agenda, I think we'll probably just simply keep the discussion items for council HRB joint meeting and leave it at that broad level, so that we can continue to discuss all of these items that are related to that joint meeting. But let's remember that we do want to come back to specifically the Mills Act and the category system.
My first thought is the category system, to me, is more direct. I mean, that has more of an impact to everybody than the Mills Act. I think the Mills Act is a good thing, but it's not. Almost every 2 or 3 weeks, I get calls about the category. Is this house? What does it mean? This house is in this category, that category. That's, I think, more out there with people buying and selling homes and improving them. So not to say Mills Act isn't important, I'm just saying the everyday world, the categories come up constantly. I'm sure you get calls almost every day. What does this category mean? So that sounds good.
I would add, we could, you have the Mills Act, but you also have, a discussion of what are the existing incentives, and to make sure we're, all clear about how we're conveying that to the public and council. We have that subdivision incentive for preservation when there's two older homes on a property, one of which is historic. We have the additional floor area ratio that you can add if you're a category 1 or 2, but not a 3 or 4. So that was a discussion that had occurred at a previous HRB meeting, possibly the retreat or earlier than that. So maybe that's kind of a broader category of incentives that includes the Mills Act and other incentives.
Yeah, all sounds good. I guess, anything else? Is there, on the agenda, there was
Can I make one comment, Roger?
one more comment.
Can you bring us, when we talk about the Mills Act, can you bring us more information, like concrete information about what San Francisco does? And Pat, I don't know if Coronado has another program that's similar. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I have some information too.
Just I think the high points of successful programs, especially if in Coronado there's a lineup. San Francisco, there's no limit, I don't think.
There's no limit, but my understanding is, for whatever reason, San Francisco's Mills Act program is very limited in its use. I think there's only 3 properties in the entire city that actually are on the Mills Act program with the city. I think to some extent, I think the initial fee is a disincentive for a lot of people. In my opinion, I think the Mills Act could be used more widely in San Francisco. There are certainly communities out there we can look at as examples to look at for Palo Alto.
Okay, but just so we actually
And we can provide some of that information to you.
Thanks.
Good. On the agenda here then, announcements, we've been doing a lot of that. The next meeting will be March
26th,
26th.
Thursday, March 26th.
And I would like to thank Councilmember Du Bois sitting here. It's really nice to see you up front here. And you don't always have to sit out in the audience if you'd like. There's an empty chair here.
Yeah,
So.
I intend to try to come, and I'll try to participate.
Yeah, well, that's
okay.
great.
I had one question regarding the meeting dates. We switched from Wednesday to Thursday.
Yep. Where were you?
I know about it, but that's just my preamble leading up to it.
Okay.
Can we go back to Wednesday?
Well, the bylaws have been adopted by the board, and the intention was, to have HRB and ARB meet on opposite Thursdays, so that there can essentially be parallel bodies, if you will. If the board as a whole wants to move it back to Wednesdays, they can certainly change their bylaws.
Well, that would probably have to.
Weighing in on that, I would say we've already, set the city calendar for this. It certainly is, for staff efficiencies of having, 1 packet a week, whether it's board or ARB instead of 2 packets some week, and, anyways, it's just more predictable as far as review of reports and agenda setting for staff. So.
It's not to make room for Zumba.
Zumba, yeah, okay. All right, anything else? I hope everyone has a nice rest of the 2 weeks, and we'll see you then, and have new thoughts about Mills Act and categories. You won't be here, okay.
But I'll think about you.
Yeah, call it in, right. Then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.